Welcome back to the Gem Cutter's Craft. Today I am in Chicago and I am ready to embark on a great adventure, possibly one of the most important adventures that I have ever gone on, and one of the most important acquisitions that I will have ever made. But more on that in a minute, because first we need to go pick up the car. So at this point you might be thinking, what could he possibly be doing that requires an entire van? And that is a valid question. But before I can tell you about this adventure and what I'm doing, we need to have a little bit of a recap, a little bit of a backstory here, because this is a big thing that's happening right now, and we need to have all the context for it to make sense. So if we go back to the pandemic, the lockdown period, and I spent a good year plus just researching the history of American gem cutting. And then when the pandemic ended, we went on a 1-year road trip across America to actually do the research on the ground for that project. So as I was doing the research, one thing leads to another. You find yourself at 3 o'clock in the morning going down rabbit holes on archive.org and everything else. And I stumbled into this Lapidary Club newsletter from, I think, 1999. And there's a guy called J. Harry Howard. So J. Harry Howard is the #1 main character of my American history book that I'm eventually going to put out. And he was the first guy to ever write a book that was an instruction manual for how to facet a stone. So this is 1935, South Carolina. And in this newsletter from 1999, I found out that when J. Harry Howard died, his wife bundled up all of his stuff and donated it to a museum and a local lapidary club in South Carolina. And then in the following issue of this newsletter, I find out a little bit more information because somebody wrote in to correct some of the information that was in the previous little article about the origins of North American gem cutting. So one thing leads to another, and I figure out what the museum is, and I figure out what the lapidary club is. And keep in mind, the pandemic is still going on, the lockdowns are still happening, and I send an email to the museum, and I send an email to the lapidary club. And the story that I had read was that a lot of his stuff went to the museum, but all of his paperwork and magazines and correspondence, which was the thing I was actually looking for, went to this lapidary club. Now, fast forward 6 months or a year, the club has gotten back to me and said they don't know anything about it. Nobody who's in the club anymore remembers anything about this happening in 1999, and they don't have anything. Meanwhile, the curator of the McKissick Museum did get back to me and was very excited for my email because she told me that she had just spent the last so many months inventorying the J. Harry Howard collection that they've had in their archives since the 1970s when he died. So she said, if you come this way, please come and visit us. We would love to have you go through these boxes with us and tell us what all of the stuff is, because we don't know what a lot of the stuff is, and the labels that we have on there aren't very useful. So as soon as the pandemic ended, we began our trip. I flew to America, I bought a car, I went to Tucson, and then immediately after Tucson, I drove to Columbia, South Carolina. Now let me click over here to the video that I shot the evening after I went to visit the McKissick Museum in Columbia, South Carolina. If we go back to the 1930s, there is no American gem cutting community. It doesn't exist yet. There's a small culture of mineral lovers and mineral collectors, but there are no gem cutters. There are no lapidary craftsmen or lapidary hobbyists, other than a couple of random people here and there who don't really know each other yet. Basically, there's one pivotal moment that the entire story revolves around, the spark that kicks it all off, and it's a letter to the editor of Rocks and Gem magazine, and it's J. Harry Howard, this random Joe from Greenville, North Carolina. He writes a letter to the editor and says, "Would you please find someone who can do a monthly column in this magazine about cutting gemstones, because some of us mineral lovers also want to be gemstone cutters and we don't know how. And so it ends up that J. Harry Howard is the man that he's looking for. He writes the pamphlet. He gets the monthly column in the magazine. He teams up with a jewelry tool manufacturer in New Jersey and releases his homebrew faceting machine, which they call the Dixon Howard No. 2. And eventually he releases a book in 1935, which is the first book about gem cutting written by an American. So 1935 is the big moment. And in this book, he's got a photo of his machine, this Dixon Howard No. 2 machine, before it's even called that. It's the prototype version that he uses. 1935, this is a 90-year-old book. It's a 90-year-old machine. It's really beyond expectation to think that something so random would still exist today. And I've been thinking about this moment for a while. I've been thinking about the moment of seeing this machine for probably 2 years. I've been dreaming of this moment. And I sort of just always imagined that it would be like in a display case in the museum, in this small university museum. And it wasn't at all like that. It wasn't on display. It was in a storage room in the basement, which sounds worse, but is actually better. There were at least 32 boxes of artifacts belonging to this gem cutter from 1935, J. Harry Howard. And we went through every single box. Hundreds of DOPs, accessories, so many cigar boxes full of rough, so much junk. This is not museum grade stuff. This is somebody's basement that's been packed into boxes and put into storage in a museum. But as we went through the boxes, I started to find pieces of this faceting machine, because they have the faceting machine. It was the first thing that we saw. There's actually 3 of them mounted to a piece of metal. Possibly he had preforming, cutting, and polishing stages all set up. But the machines aren't together. They're not built. The bases are there, the spinning part's there, but there's no quill, there's no index gear, there's no DOP, there's no mast. And so as we go through the boxes, I start to find pieces of the machine. And I know what the machine's supposed to look like because I've looked at this picture so many times. It's ingrained in my head. And so as we're pulling out these different pieces, I'm setting them aside. I'm not putting them back into their boxes. A metal DOP, a head with an index gear, the pole that holds the index gear head. And so eventually we go back over to where the machine is, and I start to take these pieces and reassemble the machine. Probably for the first time in at least 60 years. So this has been sitting down there for 60 years, never been seen assembled. Nobody knows how it's supposed to work except for me, because I've been studying it. So I didn't get to enter the museum and see this long-lost machine. Instead, I got to dig through the remaining possessions of J. Harry Howard and find each piece in a different box and assemble the machine for the first time in living memory. And only after I put it all together was I finally able to see the machine that I had been dreaming of, the experience being so much sweeter and satisfying than I ever expected it to be, because I didn't just find it, but I built it like a dream.
So as you can imagine, for me, this is an extremely surreal situation. Being able to go into the museum like that and put it all together like that, it was so cool. Now let me give you just another little clip of what happened about 5 or 6 months later when I came back on the tail end of the trip.
So the last time when I was here, I forgot to take photos or a video of the Howard collection. So this is the contents, all these boxes of J. Harry Howard's basement when he died. And each one of these things has a ton of stuff. Some of it has stones, some of it has gear, you know, dops, brushes. Here we've got, what's in here? Box of specimens, different rocks. A lot of the boxes had his rough. So he's obviously been drilling out of here. He's got these cigar boxes that are just full of different minerals, specimens, faceting rough, yeah, opals, and yeah, he's just got all the scraps. You know, if you're a gem cutter and you know what a gem cutting workshop looks like, you recognize what all the leftovers look like. You know, the pieces that you sawed off already, the pieces that you found and didn't ever do anything with. So for J. Harry Howard, his collection of leftovers is forever commemorated down here in the archives. So we're in the elevator. Yeah. With J. Harry Howard's handpiece, or faceting machine.
Real steel.
I imagine.
Not believe it.
I imagine. First time these things have ever seen daylight, probably in 40, 50, 60 years.
So I gave this talk, and we were able to actually pull out J. Harry Howard's 1935 machine and put it on the table in front of me as I was talking. So already this is like the coolest thing. This is so fun. This is such an awesome validation of all the effort of, you know, doing all this research and actually getting to go and find something really cool that's been forgotten and lost to history. Almost immediately after that talk, I emailed the curator because we started to have a conversation that sort of went like, we're looking to get rid of some of this stuff because we need to make some room in the archives. And I told her, if you ever need to get rid of any of the J. Harry Howard collection, even the random little rubber stamps of his return address or his Gerber baby bottles with his powder, I would take any of that stuff for the museum because it's so cool. It's such a great historical object to be able to, you know, celebrate amongst all my other gem cutting ephemera. I didn't get a response back for a couple of months. Now this story has two tragedies, and we are approaching the first one. I didn't hear anything back until I did, and when I did, it was not Christian, the curator, it was her assistant, who was informing me that, very tragically, curator Christian had passed away. Now this, of course, very sad, but not very surprising, because when I met Christian, one of the first things she told me was that she had cancer and that she was going to die in the next year, and she knew it, and she was okay with it. She was just living her life the way she wanted to do until she couldn't do it anymore. And eventually that time came, and my email to her never reached her because she never, you know, never came back to work, essentially. So this is when my conversation with Lana starts. Lana is Christian's assistant and who's taking over her job as curator of the museum. So she's going through her old emails and she finds this correspondence between me and the previous curator talking about the future of the J. Harry Howard collection. And I just told her the same thing. If you ever want to get rid of any of this stuff, just let me know and I will be there at the drop of a hat. And I didn't hear anything back for a year. When I found out that Christian had passed away, I kind of just thought, okay, well, you know, the museum's got its own projects. I'm not too worried about what I'm doing or what I'm thinking about. And I was fine with that, you know, so it goes. But a couple months ago, 1 year later, I did get an email back from Lana. And this is where the second tragedy comes in. She says, the University of South Carolina has just voted to close the McKissick Museum and turn it into more classrooms for the students. So they are closing the museum and they're putting everything in the museum into the archives, which means that they need to make some space in the archives to put some of this other stuff in there. And they are looking to get rid of the J. Harry Howard collection. All 40 boxes of his stuff, including the 3 faceting machines that were down there, everything. She said, if you can come down here as soon as you can with a van, you can take it all for free and add it to your museum. And I totally freaked out because this is like a dream come true. You know, J. Harry Howard, probably arguably one of the most important figures in the history of American gem cutting, not only to be able to have rediscovered his machine, but the possibility of acquiring it, of adding it to my collection, of being able to take it home and play with it and even potentially cutting a stone on it. It's incredible. It's unbelievable. I'm still shocked. But when she emailed me, she said, could you come like this week? I see that you're in New York. Maybe you could come down here. She said, time is of the essence. And I said, oh no, this is not good, because I absolutely could not come down there. My flights were booked. Every day was booked. I'm teaching a class in New York. I said, is it possible? Could we reschedule it for the end of January, just before the Tucson show? And I'll come back to America 1 week early and rent a van and come down there. And she said, okay. And now it's the end of January and I'm in a van and I'm driving from Chicago to Columbia, South Carolina. So let's see how the story unfolds. I am back on the University of South Carolina and I am in front of the secret archives waiting for Lana. So we successfully filled the entire van with machines, tools, laps, accessories, old pieces of rough, and most importantly, the J. Harry Howard faceting machine. So cool. Now, 13 hours to get back to Chicago, and it all goes into some storage. I even got a box of his original book, Handbook for the Amateur Lapidary. I think this is, yes, the second edition from 1940. And these were directly from his house. The other fun little bit I got is his return address stamp. It's happened. I can't believe it. It is just a ridiculous pile of amazement over here. So we were able to unload the entire archive's worth of stuff in about, 2 hours with the help of some of the people from the museum. I mean, it's just crazy. It's an entire complete and fully complete lapidary workshop. Like any kind of lapidary that you could want to work on, he had everything. For our next stop, we check out the inside of the handbook. We see that the book was published by Howard himself at 504 Crescent Avenue, Greenville, South Carolina, which is where he was living. And I have now brought his machine back to 504 Crescent Street. This was J. Harry Howard's house while he lived, and this was his machine that he cut on. He shows us photos of him using the drill press in the basement here. Really cool to bring it back home one last time. And now it's time to make our way to Chicago so we can unload all this stuff, go through the boxes, and see what treasures are in here to be discovered. So the entire collection has been relocated, and it's time to go through some of these boxes and see what I got here. As far as the big machines, I know what some of these are. This is a machine for drilling bead holes. Got a drill press, We've got his 3-set faceting machine. There's a cabbing machine in here, and the splash guards are here. And then this one, I think this needs assembled before we can really understand what it means, but it says it's an arc lamp base, and I saw there's another piece somewhere that's the lamp, I guess. So we'll see how this unfolds. So the box for this one says arc lamp, which I guess goes with the arc lamp base over there. I do not know what an arc lamp is, so this is definitely something to research. The Bosch & Lomb Optical Company electronic feed arc lamp. Insert carbons into carbon holders as far as possible. So I guess this is like maybe the power supply for it. Yeah, this is definitely an interesting piece of old tech that I'm going to have to do some research about to understand what it is and what it's used for and why did he have it. Here's the viewer for the arc lamp. So at some point we got to put this whole thing together and see what is it. It seems like with a complete collection of someone's lapidary studio that the best thing that one could do as a museum is to try to recreate physically his entire studio in the way that he had it based on old photos. And you can see I've got really like every little tool that he would have used, things to scrape the laps, things to roll the laps, magnifiers, dop transfers. It's crazy. These are so similar to the French transfer blocks from the 1920s. I wonder if he had seen these. He must have seen these somehow. So here's a box of mixed cabbing agates. It's just so cool to think that these were his stones. This was his collection. He found these stones, or he gathered these stones, and these are probably some offcuts of stones that we saw that, you know, that are still in the museum in their safe, because they had over 4,000 stones that he cut between cabs and faceted stones. It's just so interesting to think that these were his. So here's some of those cigar boxes full of rough that he had. And he's even got labels in here: Brookite, Petoskey, quartz, and cutting agates. This one doesn't have labels, but we can see that they're quartz, smoky quartz and regular quartz. And what's in here? Opal chips. Victoria's going to be excited about this box. It's a box of petrified wood with labels. So this one's from South Carolina, palmetto wood. This is really cool. The top of a sealed box that he, I don't know, maybe he mailed it to himself. Looks like it says it's from Brazil. And then we've got a little baggie of abrasive powder, this little box of Amazonite rough, Mexican amethyst, a little baggie with a note on it talking about how they find good arrowheads. And then this looked very exciting and promising, little brifkas with labels on them: topaz, rhodolite. Sadly, these are all empty. I think these are his original brifkas for the stones that are in the museum collection still, because they did not give me any of his faceted stones or cabs. Sadly, that would have been a really expensive gift, but still really cool to have his original papers. Here we can see some of the scraps of the stones he was cutting. This is obviously a bangle, or the what's left over from cutting a bangle, most likely done on either that drill press or sadly the one gigantic drill press that I had to leave behind. And then little ones where he's cutting out, I don't know, just little circles or rings or whatever. Just really cool to see, like, he cut this. This is so cool that I have this, and that it exists. It's just wonderful. Look at this. This is really special. Dake's varnish. So that's HC Dake
from up in Portland. This is sold by Grieger's in Los Angeles, owned by J. Harry Howard. I just love when we can connect all of these important names together. Howard, Dake, Grieger. Wow, he's even got an ink stamp from Grieger's, Pasadena, California. I wonder why he had this. What was his relationship to them? And yeah, in a box of, I don't know if these are DOPs or what, but yeah, DOPs. Cool. And here we've got a pulley powered, I guess this is a carving arbor, maybe. Looks like there's a chuck on the end of it where you could put bits. And here's a collection of vintage cabbing lap wheels. A wood one, a different kind of wood one, different kind of wood one. This one has abrasive cloth on it. One with curves. Yeah, oh, and then like the, what does that say, pumice? And here we've got a hot plate, along with a few cutting laps, some pipe cleaners. Probably really don't need to keep this. A vibro sprayer, a cute little trim saw, and then this brass splash guard, which seems like it should go on here. And the holes seem like they almost, maybe they perfectly do match up. But the way that it is, it doesn't match any place where it could go. So maybe this is the science kit box. We've got all kinds of beakers, thermometers, little droppers, metal plates, mirrors, and also he's got a stamp. The stamp part looks like it's gone, but we can see he was using this to stamp his book. This is the revised lapidary from his second book, which is super cool, and the rubber ink stamp pad. Wow, this is his actual medicine jar. One tablet on a rising, one in the afternoon, mid-morning, and one at night. Mr. J. H. Howard, 7/24/1951. Aqua. Yeah, I don't know what the medicine was. It's underneath his label of what he was keeping in it. But wow, what a weird and interesting keepsake with a date. Gotta love it. His whole polishing kit. Here's a little pot of some kind of abrasive powder that's been sitting in here for 50 years and somehow not spilled. This one's pretty cool. We can see what size diamond powder he was using for his polishing. 0 to 1, which is exactly this diamond powder that I use for polishing. It's got little saw blades here and a couple little abrasive discs. Lots of DOPs. Lots of DOPs. Little brushes that I assume he was using to put his polishing powders on the laps with. No cross-contamination. Little tiny brushes. And yeah, more brushes. Lots of brushes. Also, I guess these are some of the coolest things in here. The drill bits. We saw already what he was drilling in those other stones. So there's the smaller bits, and there's the larger bits. So you can drill out holes with carbide powder, and you can see I assume this is carbide powder all over this thing. It's pretty cool. So here are the two faceting heads. One pole screws in here, and then you can take the faceting head. Most likely this is version 1 with not very many indexes, and version 2, well, I guess there's still not very many indexes there. It's crazy that he was able to cut such good stones with such crude instrumentation. But anyway, this thing slides on here, and now you've got a way to change your angle, change your rotational index by twisting this, and no depth control. So that's a common symptom of these early American faceting machines. You know, if you've got a big stone, it's going to push the quill out a little bit. If you've got a smaller stone, it's going to move in, and that's going to change the angle relative to the lap. So this box had 2 more of those splash pans, bringing the number up to 3, which again makes me very suspicious that those 3 don't go on here somehow. And then I've also got a lower tone tumbler. So here we've got a handy grinder from the Chicago Wheel and Manufacturing Company. It looks like a little drill press kind of a thing, or a Dremel kind of a thing. And then you've got all the bits here. So yeah, it's not really a drill, it's more of a Dremel, what we would think of as a Dremel. Yeah, you can go up and down. The cord barely exists anymore. It looks like it's ready to fall apart. But a cool piece of old lapidary technology set. Here's those tumbling canisters for the lower tone. Here's another box of rocks. Got all kinds of different stuff in here. All cabbing materials or lapidary materials. And then we've got a couple more boxes of cigars, Moonstone. Not sure what that is offhand. Some other different stuff. And you can see this has been saw marks. So the lower level of the box has the bigger stuff. The 30-cent agates, the more 35-cent agates, a little bit better, and the 25-cent agate nodule. Gemstone transfer jig. Pretty cool. He's got even a way to center his stone perfectly with 4 screws. Put your dops in, lock them. This is about as high-tech, maybe a slightly more high-tech than some of the kind of transfer fixtures that we see today. Bunch more boxes of rocks, and I just discovered that a lot of these actually have labels on the left side. So this is Unikite Slate. This one is Moonstone from North Carolina. This one is Agate Pebbles. So just consider, all you lapidaries out there, what's going to be left over when you pass away? What's going to happen to all those rocks that you've been hoarding for the last 10, 20, 30, 50 years? Are they just going to go into old boxes that nobody knows what to do with? And if so, just sell them now to all the younger ones who need rough. And then the heaviest box of all, lap after lap after lap after lap after lap. Too many laps. Another box of laps, both cabbing and faceting. And some of them are actually even labeled. You can see he's using +4, 6, number 6. So if that's diamond or carbide. Here we've got another pulley thing and a vibrolap of some sort. Looks to be homemade. It's on a wooden base. Really heavy. Pretty cool. He had everything. Is it crazy that J. Harry Howard's laps are sitting on the shelf next to Johnson Kankas's giant laps? What a world. So the final step is to get all of this Howard collection, along with all the rest of my faceting machine collection that's here in Chicago, to France. But that doesn't happen until later in the year. Well, I hope you enjoyed this adventure, and I will see you next time right here on the Gem Cutter's Craft. Until then, happy cutting.